Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice is Janae Marie Kroc. And you know, Janae, how much I've been looking forward to this episode. So, first of all, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, I mean, the listeners may not be aware of you. And of course, I've watched you on 𝗵𝗍 and then I've watched your own documentary, Transformer. And I guess a good place to start would be to have an overview into what we're going to talk about today from your point of view. And we're going to talk about your journey to becoming authentic. But what would you say is the best way to sort of summarize it? And then we, of course, can get into the episode.
Oh gosh, yeah. I guess me in a nutshell is someone who grew up in a time when it wasn't even really possible to be out yet. And knowing that as I grew up, knowing at a very young age, I had, some very serious issues with my gender, but also recognizing even as a young child that it wouldn't be okay to share those things. But then, and I think the other side of that coin that made my life challenging was that I've always been really drawn to strength training and been obsessed with strength, and that's the world I was able to hide in throughout my adolescence and early adulthood. But it also made transitioning more difficult, and even today, to be honest, it's difficult to balance things always. My desires as an athlete often conflict with how I want to present in a feminine sense. And so it becomes it's always a balancing act of trying to maximize my performance as an athlete, but still make the changes to my body that help me feel comfortable in my own skin. So kind of in a nutshell, that's I guess that's the direction we're going to be going.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's hard to there'll be people listening and it's going to be hard to understand exactly what that feels like from your point of view. But of course, listening to a podcast or watching your documentary, it's inspiring because, even if you can't relate to it directly, it's like in life, we face so many external pressures, conflict, all of those things. And I feel like we said before we jumped on, talking about it openly, honestly, and actually giving people hope. And I feel like that's what you do from the position you're in, being able to actually share it all. And have you found that's the case with people sort of reaching out when they hear your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even though, like you said, my story, a lot of people may not be able to relate to my specific struggles, but I think almost everyone can relate to struggling to be authentically themselves. We all have parts of ourselves we're afraid of how other people are going to view us, how they're going to react, things we're afraid to share. So I think everyone struggles to fully be ourselves at all times. There's so many external pressures, so many societal pressures to be one way, and that pressure, could come just from society in general, from our family members, from friends, coworkers, and I think we all experience that to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. And social media as well, that featured on your documentary about, when you made that transition fully and how much people were supporting you and you were able to share it at that point where it was like that full transition. But of course, it took you many almost attempts, didn't it, to actually go, okay, I'm going to actually, because of the strength training and what you feel there and really bringing that power and what you train like, you train like a beast. So that, of course, I guess almost pulled you back to, being Matt and then being Janae. And then it's like, I guess, sort of confusing for you to be two different people as such.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing for me was being ready to walk away from my powerlifting career. And it did, I mean, honestly, a transition did shorten my career and probably prevented me from putting up bigger numbers. And towards the end, it was hard to keep, I was very focused on my lifting and I was always very focused on athletics from the time I was a young child. And that was the first time in my life, like other things felt like more of a priority. I mean, other than family, of course. So it was really difficult towards the end. I'd be getting ready for competition And then I would be, feel like I just can't put transition off any longer. I would start taking hormones, losing weight, and all these things. And then I'd be like, you know what? I don't know if I'm ready to be done competing. You know what? Let me just focus on this next contest. And then the back and forth not only hurt my performance, but also was difficult emotionally to go back and forth and then finally say, okay, you know what? This is what I really need to do, and now's the time to do it. But even now, like I said, I'm competing in jiu-jitsu now. I still train and I still lift and always will. But even now, it's still a balance and it's still challenging at times. Like I said, the things that I need to do for transition, when it starts hurting my performance, which inevitably it's going to do, that, yeah, it makes it hard as an athlete, for any serious athlete, for anyone who really enjoys competing. And when you're doing something that you willingly know is going to hurt your performance, yeah, it's really challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And were you into sport from a young age at school as well?
Yeah, always. I was just, one of those kids that was always drawn to athletics and, drawn to strength training and just from a very young age. I mean, I was kind of the crazy kid who, when I was like 8 years old, I was training at, I don't know if you had this when you were growing up, but we had track and field day at the end of the year, and it was all these little races, and yeah, and that, to me, that was like the Olympics every year. And so I'm like 8, 9 years old, and I'm training for this like months ahead of time. And my mom would be all worried, like, what are you doing? She'd see me sprinting up sand hills and, running these timed half miles. And she just didn't understand. But yeah, I just love to compete and I love to train. And growing up, that's how I was able to basically hide in the world, was, because, back then sports were considered a very masculine thing. And so that's where I was able to like hide and be perceived as, quote unquote, a normal boy. I loved sports. I felt very comfortable in that world. And so that's really what I focused on for many years.
When you started to sort of realize and think, I'm different as such, was that really young on? Can you remember that sort of pivotal moment of having different thought processes?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was almost always there. I would say, like, as young as, it's difficult to say because it goes so far back, but even at 4 or 5 years old, I know definitely by the time I was 6, and I didn't know what exactly was going on. I just felt like I was supposed to be a girl and that I wanted to be, and then that caused a lot of guilt and shame. And, the environment I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, very rural, and this is in grew up mostly in the 1980s. And it was a very different time. There wasn't much information out there. There wasn't social media. Growing up, I didn't even know what a trans person was. I don't think I even heard of one until I was probably around 10 or 11 years old. And I don't know if you ever heard of Carolyn Kasi.
No.
So she was a trans girl who was a beautiful professional model, drop dead gorgeous, and modeling professionally, doing very well in her career. Well, then she was in a James Bond movie and she played a smaller role, but when she was in that movie, she was outed. Somebody that knew her from where she grew up at outed her, and it like basically tore her whole life apart. She had just gotten married to somebody who belonged to like a royal family, and he was aware of her status, her husband was, but his family was not. And then the family demanded that he divorce her as soon as they found out. And so it ruined her marriage, ruined her professional career. But yeah, she was on a talk show, and I was actually homesick from school that day, lying on the couch, and saw the show. And I mean, I was glued to the TV the whole time. And I, at this point as a kid, I was still like in denial about that being like that I was the same. But it definitely, my intention was there, and I had all these feelings. But I was very much like, I would focus on, well, I like sports and I want to be big and strong. So I'm quote unquote normal, that's not me, but I couldn't deny. I mean, I literally thought about it every single day. And the funny thing was, I would just like daydream about being a little girl, and I wasn't doing, I didn't picture myself like playing with dolls and doing these stereotypical feminine things. I just saw myself as like kind of this little tomboy, still climbing trees and playing baseball and doing other things, I normally did, but just as a little girl. And like I said, I was just taught to believe that all these things were wrong. And like I said, there was no real knowledge about that other people felt the same way. So I just was like, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel this way? And I had this struggle of like, don't think about those things. And it was just all this guilt and shame I was carrying around every day, and no one had any idea. And because of my passion for sports and lifting, like no one, I didn't come across as someone who was naturally effeminate. So no one, I was kind of a rough and tumble little boy, and got into my share of fist fights when I was little and things like that. So no one had any idea. And when I came out later in life, like everyone was completely shocked, even to the point where some of my friends thought it was like a practical joke, because they were like, there's no way this is true. Because I was just perceived to be this very, alpha type person who, I was in the Marine Corps, power lifter, and I was known as being like always like one of the most intense and one of, like, yeah, when I was in the Marines, when I was in boot camp, I was the recruit that the drill instructors picked out to basically like keep the other recruits in line. Yeah. So then, for them to me come out as trans, people were like, no way, this can't be true. Even in the powerlifting world, that's how I was viewed. I was viewed as somebody that was one of the most intense, like the hardest workers, the craziest type lifter. And so people just didn't see it coming. And that's what I try to explain to people too, like a passion for strength or all these things that are perceived as masculine aren't. There's no gender assigned to strength training. There's no, there's lots of I think there's so much societal pressure on us from a young age. We know as young kids, okay, this is what girls do. This is what boys do. This is what's accepted and this is what's off limits. And so even as a small child, you already recognize, well, if I express interest in these things, like I was always drawn to fashion and makeup and if I went in a store, I wanted to go look at the high heels and the purses and things like that. And I recognized right away that's not okay for little boys. And if I say that I'm interested in these things, there's going to be a lot of negative things coming my way. So it was just, I buried everything down as deep as I could, and just terrified what would happen if someone found out. I knew my parents wouldn't be accepting or understanding. I was afraid of being ridiculed, and I just knew at that time, like I knew how gay people were treated, and it was really, really bad where I grew up at. And I thought, oh my gosh, if being gay is this bad, then how bad is what I am? It's got to be even worse. So it was just, I was absolutely terrified that anyone would find out how I felt. And so I did everything I could to hide all those feelings. And if any little thing would happen, I would feel super exposed and get really uncomfortable. I was actually, when I was younger, I was a skinny little kid. And in the late 70s and early 80s, like the haircut I had was kind of gender neutral. And it was kind of like what you'd almost describe as a bob nowadays. But I was a skinny little kid, and there were several times I was mistaken for a little girl, and it would cause all these conflicting emotions. Like part of me was elated, right? It was like really excited, like, oh my gosh, they think I'm a little girl. This is so awesome. But then I would feel guilty and ashamed for feeling that way. And then I was also worried, like, well, what happens when they realize I'm not? It was really embarrassing. So yeah, so any little thing, like, for example, I hated Halloween because every year for Halloween, we got dressed up. Well, every year I wanted to be a princess or, something like that. I wanted to dress up in some type of very feminine costume, but I knew I couldn't ask for that. If I did, I knew my parents would be like, why would you want to do that? And I would feel super exposed. So it filled me with anxiety every Halloween. And I would hope that maybe my mom would suggest, oh, why don't we just dress you up like a little girl this year? And but of course she never did. And but it caused me so much anxiety because what I wanted and what I knew I couldn't express, and just tortured me. So by the time I was like 10 years old, I just told my parents I'm not doing this anymore. And they didn't really question it too much, and just thought that like I was already, even at that age, I was a healthy little kid, and I was the type of kid who would pick an apple or an orange over candy. So I thought they assumed that, well, they really don't like candy, so whatever, and never really questioned why. But yeah, so like all these little things no one had any idea I was dealing with, and it was causing me all kinds of stress and anxiety and self-esteem issues. And I just grew up the entire time feeling like something was wrong with me, and that I just wanted to be, quote unquote normal and not feel that way.
Did that bleed into making friendships at school and that being harder, or did you have friends at school as well?
I was always a very social kid, so I had friends. but there was always, still like anytime you were close to somebody, I was always worried about like somehow I'm going to give myself away or somehow they'll find out. And it made my relationships with girls really awkward. And I had no female friends. And because it was like so much of me wanted to, just be one of them. But then I also knew I couldn't. And so it made my interactions with girls really awkward because the things I wanted to talk about, the things I wanted to do, I knew I couldn't say. And so it was just kind of easier again, just to avoid those interactions. So yeah, I had no female friends really growing up. And I grew up like out in the woods on a little dirt road, and we didn't have hardly any neighbors. And there were no other kids near where I lived. The only kids I interacted with, besides at school and during sports, was during the summer. Some of the older neighbors, their grandkids would come up, and then we'd play with them while they were visiting for like a couple of weeks in the summer. But other than one set of neighbors that had a granddaughter and a grandson, that was like the only girl I ever interacted with, like growing up. I was the oldest of three boys. My dad was very masculine. My mom was a total tomboy. Like she never, that's the thing. Like I couldn't even raid her closet when she was gone because she didn't own any dresses. I think she had like one dress, one pair of high heels, for like special events and stuff. She never wore makeup. So she just wasn't into any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I just had no feminine influences in my life whatsoever. Yeah, I would have loved to have like a close friend that I could have come out to, but at the same time, I think I would have been too terrified to like, what if she doesn't keep my secret? What if she exposes me? But yeah, so it was just, yeah, it made things, everyday interactions really rough. But like I said, I was able to make friends in the sports world, and that's just what I focused on. I played athletics year round, baseball in the summer, football in the fall, wrestling in the winter, was lifting weights the whole time. So that was the world that I existed in, where I felt comfortable. And I was always kind of a natural athlete and super competitive. So that's where my self-esteem came from, be able to do well in sports or doing well in school. That's kind of how I, view things. If I can get better grades, or if I can beat someone at the sport, then that means they can't look down on me. But that was basically my only means of like building self-esteem.
And was that sort of funneling? Did you ever feel anger as well and that type of emotion, or was it more like the anxieties?
No, it was more, yeah, not really a lot of anger. It was more anxiety and fear. It was just always like afraid of being exposed or someone finding out. And yeah, that even went into adulthood. I was still, when I was in the Marines, I was still terrified. There was one of my friends I was really, really close to, and I knew he was really open-minded. He had grown up in New York City and been around all different kinds of people. He played in a glam rock band. He used to have super long hair, and he knew there was something different about me. And we had a lot of conversations. We shared an apartment together and lived off base, and we were really close. And him and his girlfriend used to spend a lot of time at our place too. And they just knew there was something different about me. They didn't know what it was, but they could just tell there was something. And so we had a lot of conversations around it. And I was really close to coming out to him a couple times, but I was just so terrified. Like, what if he doesn't react positively? What if he outs me? And at that time in the military, if I would have been outed as trans, I would have been dishonorably discharged. They would kick me out of the Marines. And I really didn't even think about that. I just, was thinking about the reaction in general. But I was just terrified, like, yeah, what if people find out and what's going to happen? So I was really close. I wanted to share it with them, but I was just too terrified of the consequences. And sometimes looking back, I always kind of wonder, like, what his reaction would have been. Would it have changed the direction of my life? Would he have encouraged me to move to New York City with him when I got out of the Marines, or someplace that I, would have been more accepting, that would have been an option to, start living as my true self. But, you never know. And I don't know if emotionally I was ready to deal with it yet, because like I said, society was very different than it is now. There just wasn't the information, there wasn't the support, when I first got into college, the first thing I did was go to their library and check out every single book they had on trans people, which wasn't a lot. And all of them were written by people outside the community. They were very academic. A lot of it was very inaccurate. But yeah, just trying to find knowledge and trying to figure things out was like super difficult. And even just simple act of checking those books out filled me with anxiety, because I'm worried that the person at the desk at the library is gonna be like, why are you checking these out? Why would you want these books? And I already had like a story prepared. Oh, I have to do a paper in a sociology class or psychology class. And but yeah, even that filled me with anxiety, because every little thing made me feel super exposed.
Did it feel like going into the Marines, was that almost again to sort of hide away from it as such, or get away from the society that you'd been brought up in? Or was it just to, you know, get stuck in with that and maybe, you know, put it to the back of your mind as such?
Yeah, no, it was, you know, and it honestly took me a long time to kind of figure that out afterwards. When I really started dealing with things, it was a difficult process because I had no idea who I actually was. I had spent my entire life, you know, building this wall and hiding a large part of who I am. And then in therapy and stuff, the initial idea that was presented to me was, yeah, that I was doing all these things to compensate for my real feelings because they were viewed as traditionally masculine. And so, oh yeah, you know, that's why you want to do weightlifting. That's why you went in the Marines. That's why you did all these things that are considered like uber masculine because you're trying to hide from your true self. But then over time, you know, I realized like I tried to stop lifting and tried to slim down a ton. And that initially, the first time I made a serious attempt at transition, which there was a whole bunch of starting and stopping, but the first time I really committed to it and started taking hormones, I lost 72 pounds.
Wow.
And yeah, I went from 272 pounds down to 200. So that's from in kilograms, that's like 125, all the way down to 90. And yeah, and I did that in 4.5 months. Like, so it was pretty rapid. Yeah. And but then I was like, you know, I was losing so much strength and so much size and all this stuff I had worked so long for.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I don't know if I really want to give this all up. And then so it took a long time to unpack everything and really figure out, okay, what's authentic? What have I created? And what things, you know, who am I really and what do I really enjoy and what do I really want? But then I realized, no, I'm just someone who is passionate about strength training and loves athletics. And even the Marines, it was a challenge that I wanted to have and I enjoyed it. There were lots of days that were challenging, but but it wasn't those things so much. It was just I pretended to be more stereotypically masculine. That was kind of more of the facade. Just basically, it was all the things I eliminated, not so much the things I was doing. It was all the things I was not doing. But I was also, you know, like I was the first person to ridicule someone else for being feminine. You know, if one of my friends wore something, you know, pink or you know, did something, you know, I was the first one to give them a hard time for it because really I was projecting, right? Like the feelings that I was suppressing, I was putting that on someone else. So I was the first one to tease somebody if they were, you know, exhibiting feminine behavior or what, you know, would be considered feminine behavior. It took a long time to unpack all that and really figure it out. And then it's still like trying to find a balance with it because unfortunately transitioning to female and taking female hormones has a huge impact on your performance as an athlete. You know, it decreases muscle mass, increases body fat. And that's been hard for me because, yeah, I mean, at my core, I'm still an athlete and I still want to perform well. So yeah, that's been, you know, that's been one of the toughest challenges is trying to balance all of that. Yeah, it was difficult to figure out because it's weird to think that you don't really know yourself, but I found there's so many people that go through the world that way, pretending to be whatever, you know, maybe it's what their parents want or, you know, what society tells them they're supposed to be, and they don't pursue the things that they're really interested in or really passionate about because they're afraid of those pressures. Yeah, and for me, it took a while, but I finally figured it out. My kitten here is making, I don't know if you can hear that, but he's
You get
meowing at
bonus
me.
points for an
Wanting
animal.
attention here. I may even jump on my lap and make a little appearance here. We'll see. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people who do the same thing, you know, in different ways. Whether it maybe be the career path, like they figure, well, my parents, you know, want me to go to college for this or that, but this isn't really what I want to do, but they do it anyway. You know, there's just, you know, who they marry or, you know, where they live and all these things that they do because they feel pressured by external pressures and, you know, they're not able to follow their own heart. And, you know, and then some people eventually break through that. And then other people live their entire lives never, ever really being who they are, you know. So that's a message that I try to get to people and how important that is and how fulfilling life can be when you stop worrying about what everybody else thinks and, you know, just start being yourself. And it's huge for me. It was just, I mean, this overwhelming, huge transition and yeah, opened up so many new doors in life and just allowed me to experience so many amazing things. but it wasn't easy. I'm not gonna lie and say that, every day was great. I mean, there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of difficult challenges. And like for me, first presenting feminine in public and stuff was really like, the funny thing is I've competed in front of thousands of people. I've, spoken in front of large audiences, and that stuff doesn't bother me at all. But that first time that like I went out into, the quote unquote normal world all dolled up, I was so nervous. I mean, my hands were shaking. I almost tripped. Like the first time I went like anywhere, just like a regular place, I went grocery shopping on like a Saturday afternoon. Busiest day and the busiest time to do this. But I just got to a point where I had started going out to like, places that were trans friendly and stuff initially, and got pretty comfortable with that. And then I was just like, all right, I'm ready. This needs to be a bigger part of my life. And but that first trip out to the grocery store and stuff, oh my gosh, I was so terrified. And the thing is, at this point, my fashion and makeup skills weren't all that great, so it was quite obvious. Plus, I was still hugely muscular. At that point, I was probably like 260 pounds. And so, yeah, I mean, I stood out like as much as anyone can stand out. And I still remember like walking into the grocery store, they have the little greeter at the front door saying hi to everybody. And literally this woman started saying hi to me and her jaw just dropped, like open, like, oh my gosh. And I'm just like, you know what, just keep going, don't worry about it. And it was a day filled with such conflicting emotions because on one hand, there was this elation of finally being able to be myself and just do, normal things. But then like, there was a lot of people staring. I mean, I remember there was one kid that worked there that kept walking by me and snickering. And I was terrified that like I was actually going to be confronted and people, would say stuff out loud or, a bunch of people like point and laugh. And it didn't get quite that bad, but I was very aware of, yeah, there were, definitely. And the funny thing I noticed was the other shoppers didn't seem to notice as much. They were kind of consumed in their own things, but like the employees, like they all noticed right away. And so, yeah, so on one hand, it felt really, really good to be myself, but on another hand, it felt really, really degrading and embarrassing to be mocked and to be, treated in that way. That period was really, really, it was very educational, but it was also very challenging. And when I really started incorporating, I guess you could say like Janae into my life, this was also the time I was near the peak of my powerlifting career. And so like I tell people it was like living three lives because so I would be at a powerlifting event and I was a sponsored athlete. I was sponsored by like Muscle Tech, a big supplement company, some of the other biggest, like Elite FTS, which was, it was and continues to be one of the, biggest companies in the powerlifting world. And so I would be like, let's say I was at an event like the Arnold Classic or the Mr. Olympia, and I would be there signing autographs and taking photos with fans. And so literally people were standing in these long lines just to, get an autograph or get a photo with me. So on these weekends or when I'm in these environments, I'm being treated like this, superstar. Like I couldn't even leave to go to the restroom without being stopped 10 times, for a photo. But then I would come back home and I was working as a pharmacist at the time. So then I'm just like your average middle class, pharmacist and working at the drugstore. But then on the weekends, and then I'm going out, presenting feminine, living and starting to live my life as a trans person. And I'm not passing. I'm not, people know right away that I'm trans when they see me and I'm being treated horribly. And so it's like, one day I'm being treated like a superstar. Another day I'm being treated just like anybody else. And then another day I'm being treated like I'm less than human. And it was really tough, but it was also really like a very sobering experience. And it definitely kept me grounded and it was very educational too. Like I got to feel all these different ways people are treated in society and from one end to the other, being treated where like people just couldn't wait to have a picture with me to where I was being mocked walking down the street and insulted and, being called all kinds of nasty things. And fortunately, I never experienced any violence, but that came close a couple times. There was one night leaving a club, I had 5 guys follow me into a parking garage. So there was a couple close calls. But yeah, it was just really, a really wild experience to be, being treated like you're famous one day and then being treated, just horrible, a couple days later. Yeah, so I learned a lot and it gave me a great perspective on life for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, I guess from my point of view, when I was watching the documentary, it was like you've got an incredible physique. And I think if I saw you as Janae, or when you were Matt, I think I'd probably be like, oh, anyway, because I really do appreciate physiques in general. So I wonder if, like those supermarket analogies, I wonder if people, the workers, would still look to see how heavily muscled you are, or, they're going to look in a different way, of course. But do you think that sometimes people are quite taken back by your physique in general as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm much smaller than I used to be, but I'm still, quite muscular compared to the average person, obviously. Um, but I think now, like, I just tend to get read as a female bodybuilder. So when I'm presenting very feminine, I'll get asked, like, I'll be at the airport or whatever, and then people are like, "Oh, do you compete?" This and that. I'm like, "Oh, I used to." And so yeah, it's always very interesting. But I think now I mostly get read as just a female bodybuilder. And they're just like, "Wow, that girl is jacked," And sometimes, like, if I'm not, unfortunately for me, like, I have to wear wigs, my hair thinned, and I'm not able to grow my own hair out, which has been something that I really struggle with, because at the end of the day, when the hair comes off, sometimes it can feel like a costume, and that's really hard for me. And then also, like, a lot of things I do, because I'm, so into training and everything else, like, especially with jujitsu, like, I can't wear a wig during jujitsu. So it's like I'll show up at practice, on the days that, and I don't get all dolled up every day. I'm just, I don't know, like, I'm just not a super high maintenance type person. And just a lot of things I do, like, I'm into mountain biking and a lot of very active things. And in the summertime when it's hot, I love the water. And, wigs don't do well at the beach. And so a lot of days I don't always wear a wig. And if I don't have a wig and makeup on, I'm still mostly going to get read as male, which is tough, but it is what it is. And at this point, I just, it just, I deal with it. And I don't make a big deal about it. I don't really say much. If people assume I'm male and it's not someone I know, I'm just going to kind of go with it. It's not worth the stress of trying to explain everything, every single place I go and everything I do. I mean, I've been 100% out for a very, very long time, and all the people who know me are very aware of the situation. And I own a gym now, and yeah, a lot of days I look just like this, but a lot of days I walk in without hair and makeup on too, and nobody bats an eye. Like, they all know me and they all know who I am. But yeah, but existing in spaces where I'm not known, I'm sure, like, sometimes people either, think, "Gosh, that guy looks kind of feminine," even though he's big and muscular or whatever. And or they wonder, why are my nails painted? And the thing is, no matter, even if I'm not wearing hair and makeup, all my clothes are pretty much women's clothes. Like, they're women's jeans, and even my tops are like crop a lot of my t-shirts and stuff like that. So, and my nails are almost always painted. I carry a purse. And so, like, I definitely, even when I'm presenting the most masculine that I do, I'm definitely blurring gender lines all the time. And which I like, and I think it's a good thing. I think the more people see that, the less big of a deal it becomes. And so, and especially with the younger generation, we see so much more of that now. Like, a lot of the hairstyles that are popular are more gender neutral. You see, boys painting their nails and doing things like that. And a lot of the bags that are fashionable to carry could really be considered purses. So I think it's great that those barriers are breaking down, because ultimately I just think it's important that everyone should be able to be themselves regardless of what that is. And there's a lot of people who would exist in much more of, like, gender neutral spaces or crossover if it still wasn't, like, socially taboo to do so. And so I think it's great that a lot of those barriers are kind of being redefined and things are getting more blurry, and as they should be. Yeah. So, but it's funny though, because even sometimes when I think I'm getting read as male, I'm not. I've had a few instances where, people were talking to me, and, like, men were asking me about my lifting. And there was one time I have a handful of, I have a ton of wigs, actually. I probably have 30 something wigs, but there's like a handful that I wear on a regular basis. Like, this is my favorite one. And I have a long red-haired one, and I have another short blonde that I often wear, especially when I don't want to deal with, like, hair in my face and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the short blonde one, I mean, it's like a pixie style, but if I'm not wearing makeup and depending on how I'm dressed, I think I still probably get read more as masculine. But often, like, when I thought I was, then I realized, oh no, like, there was a time where I was taking an Uber to the airport, and it was early in the morning, so I just had my short blonde wig on. I had basically workout clothes on, but like a zip up hoodie, and I did have, like, tights on, but I had no makeup, and I honestly just assumed that I was being read as male. And I wasn't trying to. I've had vocal surgery on my vocal cords to raise the pitch of my voice. It's still not as naturally feminine as I would like it, but it made a big difference. My voice previously was very, very deep.
Mm.
Um, but I wasn't doing anything to even try to modulate my voice in the least. So I just assumed, and when he started asking me, oh, how much, do you bench and how like this stuff, starts asking a bunch of weightlifting questions as we're on the way to the airport, I just assumed I was being read as male. And then he started asking more questions. And then he started asking if I was married, and I told him I was divorced, and if I had any kids. And then he made a comment about my ex-husband, and then I was like, oh my gosh, he's totally reading me as female. And then he was getting pretty flirty, and then we got to the airport. He actually, he told me like, oh, here's my number, and if you ever need a ride, don't call Uber, just call me directly, and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh. And but yeah, so that was very affirming and felt nice. But yeah, so no matter what, I definitely blur gender lines all the time, but still being as muscular as and I struggle with that because as a woman, I would like to slim down more. And not that I'm like trying to conform to like societal beauty standards or anything like that. Like my ideal physique is still quite muscular. I would say it's more like what a lot of the top CrossFit girls are built like, but it's still like that's still a fair amount smaller than what I currently walk around at. But as an athlete and competing in jiu-jitsu, being stronger and having more muscle, it helps a lot. And when I have dropped a fair amount of weight and lost a bunch of strength. And when my jiu-jitsu performance was struggling, it was very hard. As an athlete, it's hard to do things that like I'd lose a match or something and then be thinking in my head, oh, if I just had some of my strength back, this would have been a totally different outcome. And so that's something I still struggle with back and forth. For those of people who are wondering, because I know it's a big controversy right now with trans athletes and stuff, I chose to compete in the men's division. And yeah, and that was difficult, but at the same time, like I didn't want to do anything that would harm trans people or the sport itself. And I knew that would cause a ton of controversy and something that the people that oppose trans athletes would latch onto and use as fuel to, further their agenda. And I just like at the end of the day, I just want to compete, so and currently, that's what works best. So that's what I do. But my teammates have all been super supportive and my coaches and everybody. And that's one thing when I first started jiu-jitsu 3.5 years ago, I wondered because I'd been, totally out for a long time, but I'm like, how is this new environment of people going to treat me? And often very competitive environments aren't known for being the most friendly. I was okay with however it turned out, but like I was definitely a little bit concerned. Like, is there going to be, are people going to really give me a hard time, not want me on their team, not want me at their school? Later on, after I got to know everybody really well, a couple of people did share with me that like when I first joined, no one that was currently competing there, but people who had either been there previously or, one of the owners told me some of their friends had, confronted them like, why are you letting this person train at your place and stuff like that. But I've been very fortunate. Everybody's been super supportive and I compete a lot all over the place. And so I got to know a lot of competitors from all over the country and I get a lot of positive comments. And I'm sure there's people who don't like me being there, but they've kept themselves pretty quiet and no one's ever said anything to me directly. So, it is what it is.
And in the documentary, I saw that you've got the two friends that you train with, and there was a point actually that you teared up and they were, getting quite emotional and saying, you're brothers and they're your brothers. And I was just like, it was so nice to see because you could see that emotional connection. And it's hard in life to find your people anyway. A lot of people listen to the podcast. When I talk about external pressures and things, people are like, how do you find your people, the genuine, real friendships? And it is difficult, but I also liked as well that you almost called each other out and there was that banter, but it was you being you, not, a certain what society thinks you should be. And I'm sure you feel like that in that environment to really train and immerse with them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm really fortunate to have a lot of really, really close friends. And that's one thing when I came out, like I didn't know gosh, am I going to lose a bunch of friends? Are they going to understand? And, because that environment obviously doesn't have a reputation for being the most supportive. Actually, like a lot of trans people, are afraid of, gyms in general, and in the like more extreme lifting environment. It's just assumed that those people are not going to be understanding, that they're going to be mean and possibly violent. And not that there aren't some people in those environments like that, but I was really lucky. I really didn't lose a single friend. Like I said, some of them didn't really believe me at first, thought we were some kind of practical joke. Um, and it was, at first, it was so difficult to tell the first people. It took me, my first friend that I told, it took me over 3 months of like having conversations and hinting at it and, trying to get to it to finally explain what was going on. And the funny part was, we laugh about it to this day, was that at one point, he, this was my buddy Chad, who was one of my training partners and friends from college that I had known for a really long time, and we were really close. At one point, he's like, I don't know what you have to tell me, but as long as this doesn't involve you dressing up like a girl, I'm cool with it.
No.
And so then immediately I was like, oh no. And then I was like questioning my head. I'm like, does he know? And he's telling me, don't tell me, I don't want to hear it. Or was it just a random thing he said and had no idea? And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, why did he say that? And but then when I did come out to him, we laughed, and he said the only reason he said that was because that was the one thing he was certain that it wasn't. He's like, I thought that was the safe thing to say. He's like, I thought there was no possibility that's what it could actually be. So we both laughed about it. But yeah, he's like, oh man, I felt so bad now that I said that. And he's like, he's like I said, that was the one thing he was certain it was not. And but yeah, and then just start telling people one by one, and the more people you come out to, the easier it gets. But it was super terrifying initially, and then when I realized, like, gosh, my friends are gonna stick by me. Yeah, it was really, really cool, and I'm fortunate to have like so many good friends. And I think too is like these were people that I knew really well, and we were really close for a long period of time, and they respected me, between competing and just knowing me as a person. So I think that helped a lot too. And they knew, they could tell, like when I told them these things, I was very open and vulnerable, and they could tell like how difficult this was for me, and that this wasn't, this was something really, really serious. So I think at that point it was harder, for them to be mean to someone who was being so vulnerable. And I tried really hard, like not to be defensive or, and just like lay it out there and be like, hey, this is what I've been struggling with my whole life. But yeah, fortunately it went really well. And I can't say it went that well with everybody. A lot of family members don't talk to me anymore. A lot of the extended family, like I stopped getting invited to a lot of things, and I've been invited then uninvited to weddings and stuff like that. And, I wasn't even invited to my own family's like Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving celebrations for a number of years. So I definitely have lost some people for sure. But I'm lucky to have, really fortunate to have so many good friends.
Yeah, yeah. And who was the first person you did tell? Was it a family member or a friend?
No, the first person I told was my ex-wife. And I told her I was 23. I had just gotten out of the Marines. We hadn't even started dating yet. We were friends, and we started hanging out. We would play tennis, we would go golfing, and I met her at the gym. And we just started, becoming really good friends and spending a lot of time together. And she noticed something different about me. And she started questioning me about it. And like initially I acknowledged that there was something, but I wasn't ready to be out about it yet. And she just kept guessing at it, and I couldn't even physically bring myself to tell her. Like I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. But then finally one night we were having a conversation sitting in my driveway, and she finally kind of basically guessed what it was. And I couldn't like explain it, but I couldn't deny it either. And then when she said it, I was just like, yeah, that's it. And then we just started talking about it. And then we started dating shortly after that. And initially she was supportive, but that didn't last a real long time. And then it was, then I went back to suppressing it again for like another 10 years. And I would bring it up with her and try to talk to her, but like after initially being supportive for maybe like I don't know, not even a 6-month period, for like several months, she just kind of, then she was just like, you know what, I don't want to talk about this anymore, blah, blah, blah. And so I just kind of, went back to doing what I'd always done. and for another 10 years. And then it finally got to a point, and at this point, we were married, had kids, and I was just like, look, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I have to start dealing with this. She understood, but as far as she would go, she'd be like, do what you have to do, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see it. And of course, that made it feel even worse. Now I feel like I'm doing this like shameful thing that has to be hidden. She didn't want me to tell our children. And we had a number of discussions about that, and I've always felt like honesty and openness are very important, and especially with your children. And I said, like, no, I think this is very important for me to be honest with them. And she's like, oh, it'll mess them up and this. And I said, no. I said, what'll mess them up is sooner or later they're going to find out, and they're going to wonder, why did I lie to them for so long? Why did I hide it from them? And if it's nothing to be ashamed about, then why wouldn't you be honest? And so actually shortly after we split, I sat the three of them down, and it was actually really funny because they were young. They were like, oh gosh, how old were they? Like 4, 6, and 8, I believe. So we're playing at my house, and I said, guys, I need to, explain something to you. And I explained it in very basic terms, and that I thought they would understand. And I'm like, look, this is just how I've always been. This is how I've always felt. And I said, well, now I'm going to change my clothes, and I'm going to wear, my girl clothes that I, like wearing and feel comfortable in. And they're just like, okay, and they hadn't really learned prejudice or hate yet. It hadn't been taught that that's a bad thing. So they're just like, oh, okay. And so, like little boys typically do, they're running all over the house, and they're make all kinds of noise. And I'm getting ready, change my clothes, put hair on, do my makeup. And they're kind of running in and out while this whole process is going on. And I get done, and then I call them all in the room. And my oldest walks up and looks at me, and he goes, wow, you look like a girl, a really, really big girl. And then we all just kind of busted out laughing. And then we just went about our day as totally normal, and they never thought anything of it. And but I think because I didn't I didn't explain it in a way where making it sound like it's something that's wrong or bad or something I should be ashamed of. I was just saying, hey, look, guys, this is who I am. This is how it is. This is how I like to dress, and this is like how I present. And I didn't present it like at that point in my life. I got a lot more comfortable with who I was, but I was like, no, this isn't something they should see as wrong or bad. And I didn't try to sell it to them. I just explained it in very simple terms and just said, hey, this is who I am. And so they just grew up knowing that was always a part of me, and it was never an issue. And as anyone who's seen the documentary can see, I have a very strong bond with my boys, and we're really, really close, and super thankful for that. But I think that was a huge part of it, was me being so open and honest with them at a young age, that they always knew that I would be truthful with them. That it really built a lot of trust between us. I think that was really instrumental in building the relationship that we have today. And so it was a really, really good thing. And it also just helped them to be much more open-minded and accepting of others' differences. They grew up understanding that people are different, and that's okay, and no matter what way it is. So I think it gave them a really good perspective on life and helped them to be better people.
Yeah, for sure. And when you were from a young age and sort of going towards getting married and finding your ex-wife, was there any doubt of, if you were still attracted to women? Did you ever think, would I be attracted to men? Was that confusing as well?
A little bit later on, more after I got divorced. I was always, that was one thing growing up too. That was another thing I used to convince myself that I was quote unquote normal, was that I was always like more attracted to women. So I liked sports and I liked girls. So that was like, I'm normal. But then when I got older, and after I was divorced and, really got past the point of caring what any labels meant or any type of pressures on who you should date and how you should date and all those kind of things. Yeah, it's definitely a little more blurry. I'm still and I have been and still primarily attracted to women. And I've really only ever had like a romantic connection, like an emotional connection with women. But I have gone on a handful of dates with men. And there were certain aspects of it that feel much more natural. The difficulty I had with dating and being in relationships with women, it wasn't the attraction and it wasn't the emotional connection. It was being expected to play a more masculine role in the relationship. That never felt comfortable. And that was something I had to really learn how to do. Dating initially was very difficult for me. I didn't know, and girls would perceive me, so they would see me competing and they see this very competitive person who appears to be very masculine. And, like I was a wrestler and a football player and, a power lifter. If you watch me compete on stage, I came across as like this uber masculine type person. So then they're expecting this same type of person in the relationship. And then they get to know me and see that, wow, in a lot of ways, I'm extremely feminine. And especially when it comes to relationships and intimacy. So that was definitely a challenge, has always been. And, but I just, as an adult, I was 100% honest with any girl I ever dated my entire adult life. It bothers me a little bit that some of my exes denied that they knew ahead of time. And I think they don't, I understand they don't want to be judged. I'm sure like my ex-wife doesn't want her family being like, well, if you knew that, why would you marry the person? And so it's much easier for them to say, well, I didn't know. He didn't tell me until much later. But the reality was I was honest and open with everybody right from the start. And that's, yeah, it's led to a couple of my long-term relationships ending, because I think too, like knowing it is one thing and then living with it is another. And especially when I was still existing primarily in a masculine space. I was married a second time, and that's kind of what happened. Like she was very accepting of the whole thing, but I think was still more drawn to like the masculine aspects of my personality. And at that point, I didn't think that I would ever fully transition. But yeah, that led to that relationship ending just because, she wasn't attracted to women, but then realized like, she said after we've been together for a few years, she's like, I feel like I'm totally in a relationship with another woman. And I'm like, you pretty much are, like no matter how I look, this is the reality of it. I mean, now it's much different because obviously I go on a date, I'm gonna look just like this. So people, know exactly what they're getting into, but I'm very open about being trans, so people know the situation right from the start. I don't think it's fair to anyone else or fair to myself to hide things, because I live my life in a very open way. And like I said, in my presentation, changes somewhat day to day based on, what hair I have and how much makeup I'm wearing. So, someone needs to understand that. And like, yeah, if you were to see like a dating profile I put up, there's plenty of pics of me and looking all different ways. And so people know exactly what they're getting into. But it's a little bit challenging that way because how it is with like online dating. Everybody's looking for this like perfect match, and it's hard to really explain who you are in like a couple sentences and a few photos. And so like I'm sure there's a lot of people look at my photo and be like, whoa, I don't know what that is, but I don't want any part of that. Like if that's something that they're not into, then hey, great, you're just not the person for me and I'm not the person for you. But yeah, I just feel like honesty and openness are very important. And at the same hand, in the same way though, I do understand the girls that have fully transitioned are, and have integrated into society as a woman and don't want to be seen any other way. And for them, a part of their past is something they want to leave behind. So I understand the girls that, and just for safety reasons too, potential violence and, things like that. I understand the girls that, like in the community, we refer to it as, being stealth, that no one in their lives knows they're trans. And there's so many people in society existing that way because of discrimination, because of violence and the threats of harm. I have quite a few girlfriends that, they're out to select people, but the majority of people in their life have no idea they're trans. They go to work every day and no one knows. People think that I just would say there's way more trans people than anyone realizes, just because there's so many of us that once they complete their transition, blend into society, move, start their lives over, and no one has any idea. And they think that the only trans people they're aware of are the ones who aren't able to blend in or choose not to blend in, and that, are very openly trans.
Yeah, for sure. I really liked actually how you described there about, being in a relationship and being affectionate. It's certainly been on my mind. I got divorced a few years ago, and I had this thought process of, if I find someone else, I'm going to give them compliments. I'm going to be affectionate, because I found it difficult because we weren't right for each other. And that was something I sort of suppressed, and it divided us essentially. And the more and more I explore this and talk to males about it, I think that whether you're male or female, if you're with the right person or you can find the right person, everyone deserves that affection and to feel loved and to have compliments, but I think that we can often forget that, and I know I did, but it's really nice that you say that, because why should it be just the female as such that gets affection, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, and everybody's different, right? And that's one thing I learned in relationships too, is that, the stereotypes of what, quote unquote, men want and what women want, and what we're told a man needs this, a man, and the man wants to be the provider and wants, you know what, not all guys do. And not all guys need those things. And not all women want to be taken care of or want to be these other things that are, stereotypically seen as being feminine. Some women are extremely independent and, love having their own careers and being, financially independent and stuff like that. So it's just, everything's, people are incredibly complex. And so many of us have so many different, like for me, I'm both extremely masculine and extremely feminine. I mean, I have a female gender identity no matter what. That's who I am at my core, but I do have very masculine aspects to my personality, at least what would be defined as masculine by society. So yeah, it can make relationships complicated, but when it comes to intimacy and like being romantic and stuff, I'm much more stereotypically feminine. And that was really hard when I was trying to date girls as a male. And, they're expecting this like super aggressive, alpha type person that they see on the competitive stage. And, but I'm very sweet and loving and affectionate. And not that, some men aren't that way too, but for me, it was just, I was extremely feminine when it came to all those aspects of the relationship. And it was really hard for me to be any other way. And some girls obviously found that a turnoff. Some girls loved it. Yeah, and then just like I said, like when I tried dating men, there were certain aspects that it felt really nice. It was like I felt like I could just be myself on a date. Like I didn't have to think, okay, what am I supposed to do next? And how are they perceiving this? And like, try to like, play this role. I could just be myself. But I've never met a guy that I had the same kind of attraction and connection to that I have with women. And so that's been the biggest thing. Like I've got some really funny stories about like dates I've gone on with men and just like, how that kind of all played out. And a couple of them were actually like disasters. And but I was very open about everything and knew, they knew exactly who I was and how things were. But the problem dating as openly as a trans girl is there's a lot of fetishism. People tend to fetishize you very much, or there's a lot of men interested in trans girls, but they're not comfortable enough with themselves to be open about that. People would be shocked to find this out, but there are so many men who identify as straight that are into trans girls. And they pretty much, the vast majority of them identify as straight men. I mean, they're attracted to females in general, but there's something about trans girls that's an extra turn on for them. They're not interested in men. And, but because of the stigma in society, they are terrified to be open about it. They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid what their friends will say and their, family and things like that. So there's a lot of guys out there that want to date trans girls, want to have sex with trans girls, but don't want anybody to know about it. So it becomes extremely difficult. Like, you want to be open and you want to date, but you also don't want to be treated like this sexual object that's just there for their pleasure. And I've definitely experienced that too. And, they'll tell you one thing, but then it's very clear when you're out with them that they, don't want, like, they're not bringing you home to mom, and they don't want their friends to know and things like that. So, and that never feels good to feel like something that you're someone that they want to hide. And, there'll be a lot of things like, well, let's meet up here in this other town. Let's, do this, or, I'll come to your place, you just come to my place. Like they don't want to go in public with you and stuff like that. And I'm just always very clear from the start, like, no, look, I'm not okay with any of those things. And that's not the type of relationship I'm looking for. And if you want to date me, then we're going to do normal things like everybody else. And if you're not comfortable with that, then I'm not interested. And I'm not going to say, like I said, I've never experienced the same kind of connection with a male as I have a female. But I'm not going to say that there isn't possibly someone, some guy in the world out there that I could connect with and have an amazing relationship with. I think that's possible. And I think like some areas in a relationship would be much easier for me. But in general, I just don't find most men attractive. Actually, I find most men disgusting. But guys are girls are so, pretty and soft and tend to be very hygienic, and a lot of guys to me are just like so gross. And yeah, so
Mm,
that's not something I'm into.
mm,
But like I said, I don't rule out the possibility of someday maybe running into somebody that would meet all of, everything I'm looking for. And at this point in my life, I don't care. Like, I'm not, male, female, whatever. I've dated other trans girls, like, but if they're an amazing person and they have all the qualities that are important to me, like, all of that's just secondary. I don't, it doesn't really matter at this point. I don't care what people think. If I love them and they love me and we have a good relationship, I mean, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and actually, I could see on the documentary there was it Pablo? There was a male, female, male bodybuilder that
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah,
yeah, you two were talking,
yeah,
and you went on the beach and stuff, and it
yeah,
was really nice to almost like get that snapshot of what it would be like for you to be around people that it's just you like the person for who they are, like fuck the gender, it is
yeah,
person, for their soul
yeah.
and that connection. And you guys, it was just so nice to see because I was like, they just look like really good friends. Now, have I read that right? Was it a connection that you had?
Yeah, I mean, just like that was the first time we'd ever met, but yeah, we had a lot in common. He's a really cool person. I mean, we're still friends. I don't see him much because we live in different states and things like that. And, sometimes I see him maybe once a year or so, but really good guy. But yeah, we just really connected on our journeys and our interests. We were both always into lifting, and he's just a really cool person. And then with our struggles with transition and our, the struggle with our bodies and feeling comfortable in our own skins and all those things, we just had a lot we could relate on. And yeah, it was really cool hanging out and getting to know him. And yeah, so he's a great guy, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It's just nice to have that reflection sometimes, isn't it? Of like when you meet someone, it's you just really are connected to them, and it's not all those external things of who is this person, where do they come from, etc., etc. I think we can get wrapped up in, even like you said earlier about when you're at the Arnold's or the Olympia, and it's like all of these people gravitating towards, someone that they see as an elite athlete. But sometimes it's just nice to connect with someone when you maybe don't even know their background and things like that. I'm sure you'll agree with that. It's almost quite cathartic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like one of those things, like, so, a couple times I've made friends be on a plane trip somewhere, and person sit next to you, and then you start talking, and then you hit it off, and then you end up exchanging phone numbers and staying in touch. And it's always really cool when you make a connection like that. And, just overcoming things. And, obviously with Paulo and I, it was, the trans thing and then the love of lifting.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's always really nice when you connect with someone over like a shared passion or shared experiences, and new friends and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, there was parts of the documentary where there was some rallies, and you've spoken about being fearful of aggression, etc. And I don't blame you because again, we're brought into this society of what's right and what's wrong as such. Now, when I was watching this, I was just like, it's really hard because you're watching thinking, can these people not just leave you alone? All of these banners and everything else. How does that feel for you in that scenario?
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of sad for them. It just strikes me that, okay, so here's a person, these people were traveling like a lot of miles and, coming from another state, traveling all this distance, giving up their free time. When I'm off work on a weekend or something, the last thing I want to do is drive, halfway across the country to yell at a bunch of other people you don't even know.
Yeah.
So, like, the question I had to ask was, what motivates them to do this? Like, what makes this is so important to them? They're willing to give up all this time and energy to go to these rallies, seek them out, go to them, and then harass people the entire time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, I think the most likely scenario is they obviously have issues of their own that are very, very motivating for them to want to go to these specific places and harass the specific type of people. In 90, the vast majority of these cases, you end up finding out that these people have the same gender issues or issues with their sexuality. There's something really powerful that's motivating them to put all this time and energy into this. So often it's their own issues, that the own things about themselves that they can't handle and can't deal with and dislike. that they're projecting onto other people. I mean, who is going to take all that time, make all that effort, to do those things? And that can't feel good. It can't feel good to be mean and harass people and insult people. All these people you've never met and you don't know, and they're yelling all these obscene things. And yeah, so I look at them and I'm just like, that is so sad to have all that hate and anger. And it's got to come from a place that there's something inside themselves that they're unhappy with. And it's one thing to like see something and be like, I don't understand that, or I dislike it. It's another thing to make this huge effort and spend all this time and energy, actively fighting against it. So and I just had the experience myself so many times, like people harassing me like on social media and things like that. And they'll send me these nasty DMs, and the vast majority of it I just ignore. Like, I don't have the energy nor the time, and it's not productive to argue with these people. You will never see me online like openly arguing with anyone. I just don't do that. I don't think it's productive. I don't think you're having arguments, on social media. You're not going to change someone's opinion. Everybody's hunkered down, they have their own ideas, and they just want to argue their point. So I don't find that to be a productive use of time, or you're not changing minds or convincing anybody's heart to be more loving and more accepting. But I'll get messages in my DM sometimes, and well, I get them all the time, but sometimes I can tell that person's got a lot of their own issues. And if I take the time to talk to them a little bit more, and they'll be saying really nasty, mean things, and sometimes even like, threatening violence and stuff like that. But if I approach it the right way, it doesn't take long, and then they'll end up admitting, well, yeah, I kind of feel that way too, but I'm not like you. And then the more you talk, they'll end up opening up, and you find out, yeah, they have the exact same feelings, but they haven't learned how to deal with it yet. It's shocking how often that's the case. And usually it's one of two things. It's either they have their own issues with their gender or sexuality, or they're attracted to you, and that really messes them up because they consider themselves to be heterosexual. And so if it's a male and you're attracted to a trans girl, then they're like, what does that say about my own sexuality? And that can cause a lot of anger. And that's why a lot of attacks happen on trans girls, like after being intimate with someone. The story is always, oh, I had no idea she was trans. Almost always there's these lots and lots of men strongly pursuing trans women, but like I said, they want to keep it secret. They don't want anyone to know. But then after they have sex and that, euphoria wears off, then panic often sets in. Then it's like, uh-oh, what if someone finds out? What are they going to think of me? They're going to think I'm gay, like blah, blah, blah. And then that's where they turn violent against the person they were pursuing. So more often than not, that's the actual scenario, not this, oh, I had no idea and she lured me in. It was that they actively sought these people out, but then after the act was done, now they're overcome with anxiety of, oh my God, what's going to happen if someone finds out? And that often turns into violence towards the woman. And so yeah, it can be very scary dating as a trans girl, that potential. And it's like, and that was something I had to learn, having been socialized as a male, and especially being someone who was, bigger and more muscular. I was never really worried about my surroundings. I wasn't taught to, be careful and think about my safety and things like that. But like I mentioned earlier, the night I had where 5 guys followed me into a parking garage and I was alone, that was the first time that was like a real, wake up call and a reality check, and being like, you know what, I am a target and I need to be more aware of my surroundings, and, and realize when I'm vulnerable. And honestly, I think the only thing that stopped them that night was when they got close to me and saw that I was pretty muscular. I think that made them kind of like, do, have second thoughts and think, is this the person we really want to mess with? But they got really, really close to me, and I wasn't even aware they were there until they were like right on top of me. But that little bit of hesitation allowed me to get in my car and leave. But yeah, they easily could have, tackled me from behind, hit me in the back of the head with something, stabbed me, shot me, and I had no idea. I was totally unaware of their presence until what might have been too late. And but yeah, after that, like, I realized, like, what most young girls are taught, to be aware of your surroundings and to be more careful about, going places alone and things like that. And it's so unfortunate that women have to think that way, but it is a fact of life. And I realize, like, now I fall into that demographic too.
Yeah. Did that lead to the jiu-jitsu? Was that a sort of precursor to that?
No, I mean, the jujitsu is more just something, again, like one of those pursuits. I wrestled in high school, really enjoyed it. And, and I was always interested in like martial arts. I had done Taekwondo growing up too. But just the competitive aspect of it, I love to compete. And I find that very rewarding, especially individual sports. So yeah, it was more the competitive aspect. And there's a lot of really good women in the jiu-jitsu world too, like some fierce competitors. So I think it's really, really cool. And the girls at my school and even at LC at tournaments and stuff have all been really supportive and really cool and kind of welcomed me into their little groups. I've made a lot of friends through that as well. But yeah, no, yeah, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't out of like wanting to protect myself. It was more just the competitive aspect and enjoying that type of challenge.
And do your children, are they competitive? Are they into sports?
Yeah, so my middle son Garrett was very much into all the same things I was. But he ran track, wrestled, played football. Super competitive like me. And then my oldest Logan is as well. He was more of a runner. He ran cross country, ran track, and now he's super into ultimate frisbee. That's like his sport, and he plays in leagues like year round. And he played for the University of Michigan when he was there, and that's when he really got into it. But but all my boys exercise regularly. They all lift weights, but none of them have aspirations of being like a professional powerlifter like I was, or wanting to get really big and muscular. But they all lift, they all exercise. And Logan, my oldest, has done 2 powerlifting meets. Him and a buddy did them together. And it was never anything like I pressured him into. It was something they decided they wanted to do. But he doesn't want to, like I said, ultimate's his main thing, and he still does a lot of running. Him and one of his friends right now are preparing for a marathon. They're going to run their first marathon. And so he's really into that kind of stuff. But yeah, they did a couple of powerlifting meets, and he really worked on getting stronger. We didn't want to gain a ton of weight, but yeah, they're more focused on being like all around athletic. But my youngest was a pole vaulter. That was like his sport in high school. He really enjoyed. And yeah, which was kind of crazy, like why pole vaulting out of all things, but he loved it. And yeah, and he gets up early in the morning before work to go to the gym and stuff like that. But like I said, they're all more focused on just being healthy and athletic, but none of them are really having passion for wanting to get like really big and strong. They all just kind of want to maintain more of a moderate weight and be lean and be in good shape.
I remember the bits where you were like training with them and you were trying to sort of get them to do some bench press and stuff. And, oh, I don't want to. And you're like, come on.
Yeah,
Which is super cool anyway. It's nice for parents to, like, it's something, not I wish that my mum did, but I almost wonder if my mum had sort of pushed me towards doing some sports or something at school, whether that would have ignited something. Because I've certainly noticed in the bodybuilding realm that a lot of the elite level athletes have done something in their background. So whether it be swimming or gymnastics and these types of things, but I certainly feel like it almost lays down fundamentals of having a sport. There's so much you can gain from that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think athletics, I mean, so many people underestimate, like it's always playing games and that's not useful for life skills and things like that. And I think honestly, it's exactly the opposite. Sports teach us so many things. They teach us how to lose. They teach us how to succeed. There's so many of so many of the same skills that it takes to be successful in athletics are also the same kind of skills that make you successful in life. Having the work ethic, the discipline, but like learning how to handle losing, which a lot of people, especially I think in today's society, growing up, there's very much more of not like like losing is a bad thing and everyone should be a winner. And no, losing often teaches you more than succeeding. And it's an important aspect of not only learning how to accept it, but learning from your mistakes, learning from your failures, learning from your losses. And I think that's an important lesson that sports teach as well. Teamwork and so many other things. But yeah, no, I think sports are vital, not only for the sake of themselves, but just in all the skills you learn in sports that apply for the rest of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And that sort of led into as well where the boys were around when you had surgery and they were asking questions and things. I think that sometimes as well, like you say, the skills there, it almost gives you some confidence as a child as well, which is what I saw from people that are pursuing sport, to maybe be a bit more intuitive as well and, maybe have a bit more of a voice. And it was so, so cool to see that I can see it now in my head, where they were, you know, with you and supporting you and asking you, and you explaining what this surgery entailed. Again, another learning process for them. Now, with your surgery, of course, that was over a period of time, wasn't it, of that full transition? And I remember you saying about how much it was costing and everything, and you lost your job during that time and all of that. Was that a difficult time in itself to commit to the surgery, or did you find that when you started that it was like, no, I'm going to pursue this and find the money per se?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, part of it was just that. Like, I mean, these are things like I've known I've always wanted. You know, I've been researching them for so many years. Long before I even accepted the fact that I was trans, I was already researching surgeries and procedures and hormones and all that stuff already. So it's funny when you look back how you can lie to yourself and how you can be in denial. I mean, throughout my entire life, like I was just always, you know, super fascinated by all of this, very much drawn to it and wanted to know everything there was about it. And yeah, I've got like basically a library of trans books long before. I mean, I was still trying to like sort things out myself long before I like fully accepted that I was trans, that I was already buying all kinds of books and doing all kinds of research. And the thing for me was one of the things that kept me, I think, in denial longer was that I never saw any trans girls like myself. All the trans girls I saw were stereotypically feminine, were not athletic, you know, very much never fit in at all, like in the male world growing up. And so, like I said, the fact that I was not only into sports, but really good at them, and then also, you know, that I was really passionate about strength and putting on muscle and things like that, and that I was attracted to women, like those things, you know, kept me in denial about actually being trans. Well, I like this, so I can't be trans. I do this, so I can't be trans, because I'd never seen anyone that was like me. And I still remember the moment that it hit me. I was reading a book by a woman named Donna Rose, and she was from Canada, and she was a college wrestler. And I remember at one point I'm reading the book, and she was talking about when she was in college and she was wrestling, and she was putting on a lot of muscle and lifting and everything. And then it just hit me, like, and now she's, you know, transitioned and very, very happy. And but just like there were so many parallels, and it just hit me all of a sudden. And I remember sitting there like setting the book down and going, oh crap. You know, I really am trans. Like the fact that I like these things doesn't preclude that. Yeah. And but yeah, I mean, it's so obvious looking back. There were so many things, like I said, between Halloween and like I never went to like homecoming. I never went to dances and stuff in high school, because like prom, I never went to a prom because just the idea of it made me so uncomfortable and filled me with so much anxiety. Because yeah, I wanted to wear the prom dress. I wanted to be the one doing it, and I couldn't bear having to wear a tuxedo and, you know, and be with a girl and like wanting to be her so bad. So I just avoided all those things. And like, and sometimes girls would ask me to go to prom, and I would come up with some kind of excuse and, you know, why I didn't want to go and things like that. But yeah, but it was just so obvious. There were so many things growing up, and it's amazing that I was able to keep myself in denial as long as I did. But it was really a protective mechanism. It was really like keeping me safe, and so much of it was due to the, you know, the fear. But back then that wasn't even an option. Like had I showed up, had I been like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna wear a dress and I'm gonna get dolled up and I'm gonna go, I wouldn't have made it in the front doors of the school. I would have been expelled. I don't even know what would have happened, but it was just wasn't even an option. That's not even something you could have entertained back then. And most likely I probably would have been attacked too. Um, but and I certainly would have been ostracized from, you know, all my social circles at that point. You know, unfortunately, like sometimes I feel like, gosh, I was just born a few generations too soon. You know, had I been born, you know, 50 years later, you know, life would have been a lot easier. But I also feel fortunate that I was able to be one of the people that maybe helped a lot of other people that came after me to make things easier for them. Because I really, that's why I continue to talk and be open about this stuff, because I know there's still a ton of people out there that are afraid to be who they are and are still struggling with those things, and still exist environments where it's not okay to be trans. There's still a lot of places in the world where it's still very similar to how I grew up, or sometimes even worse. you still face extreme violence for just being different. So yeah, I think that's why it's so important to be open and honest about these things to help educate people. And there's just the sad fact that we've become politicized now and become part of this political argument, been portrayed in a completely untruthful way. It makes it really hard because it's setting everything back, and it's stirred up a lot of hate against the transgender community. And just so much of what's being said is, totally false and not accurate at all. And so it's really frustrating, but that's another reason why I think it's so important to be open and honest so people actually understand. It's easy to hate things that you don't understand or you don't interact with directly, and it's just kind of this idea. And then when you actually meet someone face to face and see them as a person, it becomes a whole different thing. And it's easy to hate something you don't know, and it's much harder to hate something when you're well educated about it, and you see it face to face, and you realize this is another human being, and they realize we have a lot more in common than we have different. And I think that's the thing that really, is capable of changing people's minds. And I've been told that so many times, and just in like accidental, like casual conversations and meeting strangers, that and having, conversations maybe over lifting or something else. And then me, questions, one question leads to another question, and we get talking, and then it leads to me, coming out as trans. And then like I couldn't tell you how many times I've like met a stranger and then had like this 2-hour conversation and like explaining everything, and then they walk away with like, wow, I never would have thought, like I never understood trans people, but just meeting you and hearing your story have completely changed my views on this. I mean, I think that stuff's so powerful. And then you never know like how many people that's going to affect, that those people are, it's changed their opinion and who they might affect, and like in decisions and how it's going to change decisions they would make. And but yeah, that's a really powerful thing, and I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to have those type of interactions and be able to share my story and hopefully change minds and hearts, and impact the world in a positive way.
Yeah, I feel like as well, in that sort of same thing as what you're saying there, because you've actually, it's a really long journey, and the amount of struggles and challenges you've come across, and for you to even sit here today and share this story and be open about it. And if someone, people will be listening, that they might be facing something pretty small, and it could be, something that they've blown up in their head, and it's like, I can't tackle this, I don't know what to do. And then they hear a story like yours, and it certainly gives context as well. And from what you've done and where you are now, standing there proud to be who you are, it's massive. Like I was literally hooked on watching your story, and it was like, wow, this, like you said, this person is a human being, and it really does give that context. So I think people would also perhaps think that way as well.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm really happy with in the documentary, I think the director did a really good job of, people sometimes wonder, like, what was that scripted? Like, were you guys told to do certain things? And I've definitely been, accused of, if like people will say, oh, those boys had to be forced to say that stuff. There's no way they would be that supportive. No, all they did was follow us around for 2 years, film what we were doing. And the biggest thing, like I tell people, is I would often forget that like everything was being recorded, and then I had a mic on all the time. And because like I got to know the whole crew, the videographer and the sound guy and the director and the producers. So I get to know all them. They all became friends throughout this process. We spent so much time together and traveling and going different places and, just talking with them. So when they would come visit and like hang out and film us, it was just like hanging out with more friends. And I would totally like forget that the cameras are on. And sometimes I would say something and be like, oh boy, I don't know if I want that like in the documentary. Yeah. But I thought he did a really good job of, just letting things happen organically and just sharing our story without, he said right from the beginning, and I was leery about doing it when he first approached me, to be honest, because I'd already had a couple instances where people had exploited me and like, claimed the interview was going to be one thing and then, totally turned it into something else. And like people acting like they were supportive or understanding or wanted to know more, but then really they were just trying to ridicule you and turn it into a freak show. I had that happen a couple times. And fortunately, the times I've had it happen, I was very lucky to be able to steer the conversation back in a more important direction and keep it away from that. But then, you can't control like how people edit things and how they're going to, show the video later. And I had one instance in particular where they just kind of turned it into like a shock type, dress up show. And that was really disappointing because we had filmed all this interview stuff. They never used any of that. It was more like they tried to turn it into a freak show. And I was afraid of that with the documentary. But Michael, the director, he flew out to Michigan. He's like, hey, let me just come out and share with you what I have in mind. And he was just like, look, there is no political agenda. There's no bias here. Like, I just think this is a really fascinating story. And I think it's something that, it's important for people to hear. And he's like, I'm just going to, share your story. He's like, I'm not going to push you to do anything or say anything. That's all, I just want you to be you. And fortunately for me, I'm not really able to do anything else. So this is who I am, and this is how it comes out. And I think people really got to see that in the documentary, though. And I think that's the important part, just for people to see I'm just another human being like everybody else. And, I have my good qualities, I have my flaws. And I thought it was really important. I was glad that people got to see the relationship I have with my sons. That was really important to me. And I left that totally up to them when they, because like my brothers opted to not be in the documentary, both my younger brothers. And funny thing is, my middle brother, years later, someone asked him why he wasn't in the documentary. And he didn't remember like turning it down. And he came to me and was like angry. And he's like, yeah, hey, how come I wasn't in it? This and that. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I asked you right off the bat and you were like, absolutely not. You wanted no part of it. And then he was kind of like, oh yeah, I forgot that. When we told him it was happening and stuff, he's like, nope, you don't want to be any part of it. And even my parents were reluctant to be in it. And my mom took a little convincing. One of the producers and the director had talked to her, and she's someone who's very private anyway, unlike me. So it took a little like, hey, look, this is what we're doing, and we just want people to understand how you feel too. And the funny thing is when they filmed that, the documentary, when we went to my mom's house, she had known for 10 years when we had not had a single conversation about it. And I kind of expressed that in the documentary, but like every time I tried to talk to her, she would immediately change the subject or just not reply and literally refuse to even talk about it. And that was the first time I got to hear like some of her feelings. And like when she said that she felt like I had died, I was like, holy crap, like really? That's how you feel? Like, and she had never expressed that to me. And then my dad, like some of the stuff he said, obviously, his words weren't very kind. And I was just glad they were both honest and open as much as they could be. I was afraid, especially like when they said they wanted to interview my mom, I'm like, oh, I don't know if she's going to be honest. She's, she was always very concerned about what people thought. So I was just happy that she let her guard down and did share how she actually felt, even though it was a little hard for me to hear. She didn't say like really nice things, and she still struggles with it. I mean, she's much better now, but I can tell like she's still like working at it, and it's still difficult for her. And my dad, now passed away 2 years ago, but his opinion didn't change a whole lot. The one thing was I knew he loved me, and no matter what, he still wanted me as a part of his life. But he wasn't thrilled about it. He didn't really. I think it's just, generational differences and, growing up in a small town. He'd existed in the same small environment his entire life. And I think he felt pressure as a man. He was not supposed to accept me. It was not okay for him to do. But yeah, it wasn't easy for me to hear, but at least I'm glad they were honest about things.
Yeah, I guess sometimes there's that message there that actually, if you can hear what people's honest opinions are face to face, actually, if you can overcome that and deal with that and process that, you can sometimes get closer to family members or close friends if you just, say it how it is. But I felt it, and, clearly you did as well when your mum said that. It was like, holy shit, it must have been, especially if that's the first time you sort of heard that. Was it just like, because I saw it on your face as well, but of course, having context.
It totally caught me off guard. I mean, I knew she was uncomfortable talking about it, but like actually saying that she felt like the child she knew died, I'm like, what? Like, and I'm like, I hadn't even been around her much, like presenting feminine that way. Actually, I think that day was the first time she saw me presenting feminine because I knew she was so uncomfortable with it. And I'm just like, this is how you actually feel? Like, wow. Yeah, it was like, that definitely caught me off guard. I mean, like I said, I knew she was uncomfortable, but I didn't realize like her feelings were like that. And I was surprised my brothers took it harder than I expected to. I knew my middle brother would probably have a hard time with it. But the youngest brother, he was very open-minded and had friends that were trans and had a lot of friends in the gay community. And so like I thought for sure it wouldn't be a big deal for him at all. And he was supportive, but it was still harder for him. I think it just wasn't who he saw me as, and being the older sibling always looked up to me. So it was more difficult for him than I thought it would be. Because I thought for him it'd be no big deal. Like he has friends that are trans, like he'll totally get this. And but I just think the fact that it was me, it was a little different for him. But like I said, he was supportive, but it was more of a shock than I was expecting it to be. The other thing that surprised me too was that I just assumed, like I thought, like my family had to know, like or have some idea.
Yeah.
There was just like there were so many times like growing up, I'd say something or do something, and then be like, "Oh my gosh, did they pick up on that? Did they know?" My brother Kurt caught me one time wearing my mom's high heels, and and I had locked myself in the bathroom, and we grew up in like a small trailer, and I mean the doors were super flimsy, and there was only one bathroom, and you basically like push the door in, and the lock would like pop, and the door would open. And I was in the bathroom, and I had put her high heels on, and then he was, like banging on the door, like I need to use the bathroom, hurry up, this and that, and I'm like, oh, I'll be out in a second or whatever. And then he kicked the door in, and like, and I was sitting there, and I jumped up and slammed the door closed, and I was like, oh no. And I just thought, like, here we go. Like, he's gonna tease me, make fun of me, and he's gonna tell mom and dad, like, how do I even begin to explain this? But he never said a word. And I was waiting, waiting and waiting for him to say something. And he didn't, that night went by, he didn't say anything, next 2 days, and I'm just like, I guess he's not going to say anything. Then I brought it up years later, and he told me he never noticed. He never knew. He's like, I don't. He's like, yeah. He's like, I didn't. He's like, I don't remember that at all. But he's like, no, I never. He's like, I never noticed. He's like, if I would have, he's like, oh, I would definitely have said something. But he just happened to not notice that I had high heels on. There were a few incidents like that. Like, I thought like, oh, they saw this or they noticed that. Like I just thought that, when I expected when I came out that they're going to be like, well, we kind of wondered or figured there had to be something, but no, they were completely shocked and had no idea. And no one in my life did. Yeah, it was, it was not what I expected. I really thought that like, they would have picked up on some things, but that was just me being so paranoid and being so terrified that someone's going to find out that I felt like, they could read my mind, or somehow they knew what I was thinking or knew, um, what I really wanted or who I really was. And, but no, they had no idea. Even the people closest to me had no idea whatsoever. And I think that just shows you the propensity people have to hide things when they're afraid. It's just like so many people go through lives pretending to be someone else or, hiding certain things that they just, especially, they worry about their parents or their siblings or the people close to them judging them. And it's amazing the lengths people will go to keep those things secret when they're afraid of the consequences. And that's certainly how it was for me. I was just terrified my entire life would be ruined if anyone found out. And I was just so relieved and happy to find out, like on the other end of it, that's not how it was at all. Like it's enhanced my life in every way. I never imagined, for a minute that this life would even be possible. Especially like I looked at myself and I'm like, I'm this big masculine person. There is no way I could ever transition. There's no way I could be out about this. No one's going to understand. No one's going to support me. I'm going to lose everybody and everything. I considered suicide at one point because I just did not see my life ever working out. And I knew I couldn't live in denial forever. But then I also didn't see living as myself to even be a possibility. There's no way this could ever happen. And it felt hopeless. It felt completely hopeless. So at one point I thought, you know what, it might just be better to end my life instead of shaming my entire family and, doing all these things. And, but fortunately I didn't do those things, and everything worked out. But yeah, I definitely went through a period where I was 100% certain that I would never be able to be myself. And it's so good to come out on the other end and realize, like, not only have I been able to do it, but that it's made my life so much better. Yeah, it's things are life is 100 times better. And that's what I've heard over and over again from, trans people that have come out and transitioned. And just so many of them, everybody says the only thing they regret is not doing it sooner. I mean, that's almost always the result. And same thing for me, and sometimes you look, gosh, what if I had transitioned younger? And, because physically speaking, the transition is much easier when you're younger. Your body responds better to hormones. The transition's a much easier process. The younger you start, basically, the better the results are going to be, and the less need there's going to be for certain surgeries and things like that. But I'm just thankful too that those surgeries are available. It was an option for me, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to afford them, even as expensive as they were. The first surgery I had done was a partial facial feminization, and I was really, really nervous about doing that because I was out to like people really close to me, but not out in general. But I knew it was something I really, really wanted. But I was also like, I mean, you're having surgery on to alter the appearance of your face. I'm like, well, how is this going to turn out? What if I look really weird? What if it doesn't go well? And then I was worried about, like, what if it's, just too feminine, and then I look goofy, and I'll need to present feminine all the time. And I didn't think I was ready for that at that point. I wasn't even sure if that's what I 100% wanted. And, but I had that first surgery and was so happy. And even the small changes it made, because we only did a few things, I immediately wanted more. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so good. And this makes me a lot happier. And then every procedure I've had, like, it's just been like that every single time. It's like, this feels so good. And I wish I had done this sooner. But it is difficult because the procedures are so expensive. Most of them are not covered by insurance. And that prohibits a lot of trans people from being able to, pursue these things. It's just, I mean, I've spent well over $100,000 out of my own pocket, pursuing this. And it was difficult. I had to save for a long time. Sometimes I took loans. It was really, really difficult. And at the point in the documentary where I had just had my vocal cord surgery and was about to have my facial surgery, and then I was fired from my pharmacist job. That was, oh man, that was so frustrating. That was so hard. It's one thing. I've never been fired for anything in my life. Like, I've kind of always been a classic overachiever. And then just insulting as that was, and then to know, of course they didn't acknowledge it, but to know that it wasn't because of what I did, it was because of who I was. That was so frustrating and difficult to deal with. And then it was so hard to get another job. Prior to that, like, I mean, usually, at that time, pharmacists were pretty much in demand. So I could quit one job and have another one in less than a week. And so the next day, I went through 51 interviews, I think, over an 11-month period, or 51 applications. I put out 51 applications before I got my first interview. And yeah, like, yeah, and then some of the jobs I was super qualified for. So at the time, I'd been working in specialty pharmacy, which I had been working in specialty pharmacy for 7 years, and specialty pharmacy had only existed for like a little over a decade. It hadn't even been around that long. So I had a ton of experience, was super qualified, and there were a couple of specialty pharmacy jobs that opened up. I applied and, did the best resume I could. Never even got a phone call, never got an email, nothing. And I can only assume, and I'm sure in some of those instances, the job position was already filled, or they went with someone for, whatever reason. But I can only assume in a lot of the cases that I never even got a phone call or an interview or anything was that, yeah, like nowadays they Google you. And when you, Google me, it's real easy. At first thing that comes up is, all the trans stuff and stuff about me competing and all these other things. But I'm sure a lot of them looked at it and said, well, no, we don't want to, this person might be too much of a hassle. We don't want to deal with this. Or some of them just flat out didn't like it or didn't agree with it. And like, no, I'm not going to hire this person. And but yeah, it took me 11 months and 50 some applications to finally get my first interview. And then when I got interviewed, the first interview, I did get that job. But yeah, I was out of work as a pharmacist for almost an entire year. I was just trading clients, in powerlifting and coaching people to get by until that happened. But yeah, that was really difficult and scary. And then here, I'm supposed to have this facial surgery that was super expensive, and I had set money aside for that. But then I was like, I'm going to need some of that money to live on. And so I had a conversation with the surgeon and said, hey, look, I had this money set aside for the surgery, but I can't afford to spend all of that money now. And the surgeon was kind enough to be like, well, hey, how much can you afford? And I told him, and he agreed to do the surgery for that price. And so that was really cool. And yeah, so, but yeah, that was really cool. But yeah, it was, it made things really challenging. But yeah, I'm so happy with all the results. And there's still a couple more things I'd like to have done. But we'll see. Life is always interesting, and things can be a little bit unpredictable. But yeah, like every single thing I've had done, I've only wanted more, because every single step has made me feel more comfortable in my own skin and made me feel happier about what I see in the mirror. And that's always been the biggest challenge for me. It shocked me later on after I came out, and and then having girls from high school or girls from the competitive world and stuff like the bodybuilding and powerlifting world just reach out and say things like, oh, we always thought you were so cute, or you're so hot, or whatever. And I was like, what? I just accepted when I was younger, and I'm sure this had a lot to do with me not being comfortable in my own skin and never really relating to the reflection I saw in the mirror. But I just accepted the fact that I was very unattractive and that I was ugly, and that no one would ever want to be with me. So I just kind of made peace with that. Like in high school, I remember looking in the mirror and looking at my face and looking at all the things that I thought were wrong with it. And really, there were a lot of the masculine attributes, and just being like, hey, look, you're not attractive. No one's going to want to date you. Just focus on sports and school and make the best of it. And then to hear later on, people acknowledging that, oh no, we thought, this or that. And I was totally shocked by that, because I didn't see that at all. And even now, I admit I struggle with that maybe more than I should, but it's still, like I said, the more I move in that direction, the better I feel. But it's still difficult. I know trans girls too that are I see them and I think, oh my God, they're so beautiful and so feminine. But even they struggle with oh, well, this part of me still looks masculine, or, they feel like certain things they're just not comfortable with. And to me, I look at them and be like, are you kidding me? You're gorgeous. And I know I have a tendency to do that myself. And then choosing to remain more muscular than, sometimes I would even, but much more so than, a typical woman in society, makes things more challenging too. And I definitely struggle. There'll be times I'll be going to a wedding or something, and I'll be trying different dresses on and being like, oh my gosh, I just really don't like how my body looks in this. And I know a lot of women struggle with stuff like that. But yeah, there's definitely still things to work on. And, and there, like I said, had I transitioned younger and my body hadn't already gone through, all of the puberty and everything else, and hadn't had all those changes, I'm sure it would have made things a lot easier. But, it is what it is, and I am where I am, and I'm fortunate to, have gotten to this point. But that's the best thing about there being more information out there and more access. And that's the most frustrating thing about so many of the lies that are being told, and all these laws being created to prevent people from transitioning, and being, presented as, oh, we're protecting the children, when in reality you're doing exactly the opposite, by forcing someone to go through a puberty that doesn't feel natural to them, and then they're going to have to spend all this time and money through surgeries trying to undo these things. You're literally tormenting those people. It would be no different than forcing someone who's a male that identifies as male and feels completely comfortable in that body, forcing them to grow boobs and these other things, and then, oh, you just exist that way, you just walk around every day like that. Here's the thing too, it's they talk about the puberty blockers, and well, we don't know what they're going to do, and they're used all the times for other cases. There's a person I know very well that when they went into puberty, and this is not uncommon, they were male and they started to develop breasts. And, and for a lot of people, it starts and it kind of goes away. It's not uncommon when the testosterone levels first spike if they have excess estrogen. But this person they started growing very quickly. And it was super noticeable. And I remember that whole summer, they would never take their shirt off and they would swim with clothes on. And they were skinny, so it was very obvious. They ended up going and having a double mastectomy and having surgery to remove all of the breast tissue because it was developing so rapidly. And they told them that, we can either put you on hormones, puberty blockers, but it's going to take time, or we can do surgery and it'll be gone forever. And they opted for the surgery right away. Well, no one has an issue with that. No one's like, oh, well, you just put a young child who's just starting puberty. Oh, they just had, a serious surgery, or they're gonna put them on hormone blockers. No one's gonna object to that. But now, because it's going in the opposite direction and they don't understand how this person feels, oh, well, they have to be mentally ill. They're a child. What do they know? They don't, know their own body. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be precautions in place and this shouldn't be something that maybe you can't just do on a whim. That's if you don't know trans people and you haven't had these conversations, and not all of us know right away. Some people it does take until they're adults to kind of figure things out, but there's a lot of us that know at a very young age and beyond any doubt whatsoever. And then for those people, forcing them to go longer, you're just tormenting them and putting them through tons of mental anguish. You're greatly increasing their risk of depression and suicide. And I mean, just imagine if you're someone who doesn't understand, doesn't feel this way, but imagine going through the opposite puberty that you feel comfortable with and being forced to live that way. And I mean, it's just super traumatic, and that was really hard for me growing up too. I'm watching other girls go through puberty and every day wondering what it's like to be them. And wanting that so bad, but not being able to say anything or do anything about it. And I was lucky too, because so naturally, I barely developed any facial hair. I was not hairy at all. I really only had hair from my elbows down and my knees down. And that was something that made me super uncomfortable. Later on, I got a little older and, started growing a little bit of facial hair. And then when I was competing professionally and started taking more androgens, and that was something that was a really difficult decision for me too, because then it started further enhancing those characteristics. Yeah. And that I was never someone who could ever grow a beard or a mustache, and thank God, because that was something that made me really, really uncomfortable. But when I started to get a little more facial hair, it made me really uncomfortable. I did not like that at all. And I've had a lot of laser hair removal done to try to get rid of every single little hair. But yeah, just all of those things just felt so wrong to me and made me so uncomfortable. And even now, and I finally been able to get some breast development, but I would like a lot more. And it's difficult. Like I said, still living in a way where I kind of blur gender lines and stuff. There would be days where having large, obviously very feminine breasts might complicate things. But I still, every little bit of growth makes me super happy. It just finally feeling like having a body that feels like mine. I'm still, still taking hormones, and still my doctor's working with me to, get things to keep changing and trying to, maintain as much performance as I can. And that's been the real trick that kind of holds things back too. But even the modest amount of development I have now, I'm really happy with, and just hope we can achieve more. But it's so nice to, feel those changes and see it in the mirror, and and be able to wear certain clothes, and but just feeling comfortable in your own skin. And I don't think it's hard for someone who doesn't feel that way to understand those things. But all I can say is imagine yourself in the opposite body that doesn't feel right to you at all. What would you do to be comfortable in your own skin? And the answer is all the things we go through, all the surgeries, the hormones, the procedures, and going through the ridicule and losing friends and family, and being subject to violence and discrimination and all these other things, but just so you can feel comfortable in your own skin. And but I'm just thankful that these procedures are available, and it saddens me to see all these people trying to create and support laws that prevent us from doing this. And really, all that it's all a political agenda. All it is doing is to rile up a voter base, and it has nothing to do with trans people or protecting children. It's exactly the opposite. I mean, the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association are in strong agreement about, all the studies that have been done show that, allowing people to transition greatly improves mental health, happiness, decreases depression, decreases suicide attempts. And it's really difficult to watch all these things be manipulated and twisted, and interviewing people on these really popular podcasts and stuff, that you can always find someone, some dissenter, or some, you find someone who detransitioned that wasn't happy with transition, and there are people that make mistakes, that transition's not for them. But instead of accepting responsibility and saying that, I made some decisions that weren't right for me, they're blaming this whole, oh, I was forced, I was tricked, it's a cult. No, it is not easy to transition. There are tons of hoops you have to jump through. There are lots of things in place to make this not an easy process. And it takes a lot of effort to undergo these things. And then to act like you were somehow forced into it, or it's just some cool thing to do, that's just not the reality. And having like a few scientists on that, like are less than 1% of the entire community that disagree with it, and usually it's because of their own personal agenda, and then acting like, oh, this is what, doctors think. No, that's not how it is. And this has been well researched and studied. And like I said, the medical community is in very much agreement about the best things to do for trans people. But because of, it's been drug into politics, now we're seeing all this misinformation and all these laws trying to be passed. And that's really sad and frustrating. And really all you're doing is harming a bunch of kids who need these procedures, and you're preventing them from being able to pursue it. And that is heartbreaking to me, and really difficult to see.
When you got to that point of, like you said, feeling like you wanted to end it and commit suicide, was there like one thing that kept you going, or was it just this inside that it was like, I can't give up?
I mean, part of it is just the way I'm genetically wired. Like, I'm not the type of person to give up in any scenario, but a big part of it was my sons. Like, I knew I couldn't do that to them. So that was the biggest thing.
You could see just how strong that bond was on the, makes me feel it, it was so nice to see that, because also I watched it with some friends, and you'll be happy to hear that they were like, this is phenomenal that your children get that learning opportunity, because we are all different. And I've spent, a lot of my life suppressing things in my personality traits, let alone what you've been through. And this is where I say you inspire me. And I mean that. And, people that will listen, and like we said earlier, what you've been through, and standing there now and being proud, but still admitting that there is struggles still now, it is hugely inspirational. And yeah, it's hard to put to words, because I just want to come through and give you a hug, because I can tell you're just such a genuine and nice person. We don't come across people like that in life as often as I'd hope we would. But I'd like to ask you, before we wrap up, a question from one of the listeners, if that's okay. And it relates to what we just spoke about there as well. So Ali, who I've spoken to him about you, he's a friend, and he's like, it's phenomenal, and he cannot wait to listen. But he said, what was the best bit of advice that you've ever received?
Oh boy. Gosh, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I tried to speak to a lot of people that were further along in the process than I was when I initially was undertaking this. And I think just the fact that knowing so many people had gone through it and were so happy with the results, because I think that was the thing that was the hardest. Like, think about it, like, going through facial surgery and getting on hormones and, making these changes to your body. It's just, you're so afraid, like, gosh, am I going to be happy with how this turns out? Like, what if it doesn't work the way I want it to? I mean, you have this idea in your head of who, you know who you are, but what you hope to look like. But what if it doesn't turn out that way? What if it doesn't? And then just hearing, I wouldn't say it was specific advice, but just hearing so many people all echoing the same thing, that like, my only regret is not doing this sooner. I'm just hearing it over and over again. And even when things didn't turn out perfect, even when they lost, maybe lost a job, lost their career, lost friends and family, like there were so many trans girls that I spoke to that their lives were much, much tougher now. But in spite of that, they were like, absolutely, this was the right decision, 110%. And I only wish I'd done it sooner, and it was worth every bit of sacrifice. So I think that was the thing that, like, okay, like, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is what I want and need. But I was just so much in doubt about like what the outcome was going to be like. And I lost my job. I lost sponsors, like oh my gosh, the messages I received, so many hateful messages and threats. I mean, I had all kinds of like people threatening to kill me and stuff like that. Like, it was crazy. But there were a lot of people that stuck by me too. And it was all strangers that said this stuff. But there were times, yeah, there's been times where like, I've had one guy harassed me nonstop for 9 months straight, like online, just creating fake profiles and like with my images on them, trying to blackmail me, like force me to do things. And I wasn't going to cave. I never did. But like was so persistent in it. And then the threats just escalated. And towards the end, he was threatening to kill me and all this stuff. And the thing is, I had no idea. And then you realize like legally, like how powerless you are. There's nothing the police could do. There's nothing anyone could do. They had no idea who this person was or where he was. And then with me doing like public speaking and stuff like that, like it could have been any one of those people in the audience. I would be up there speaking sometimes and then be thinking like, is one of these people here to harm me? You never know. And so that was like scary at times. And who knows, that could still happen, but that's some of the risks you take being open and being, somewhat of a public figure. But like, I don't regret it for a minute. Not even, I don't even have to think about that. There's no hesitation whatsoever. Like I said, 100%, like absolutely the right decision and the best decision I've ever made. And like I said, I still, there's still more that I would like and hope to get to. But yeah, it's made life 100 times better. That's not to say that it's easy. It's not to say there haven't been struggles, and there haven't been days that have made me, question everything. Even now, like trying to find the balance in performing as an athlete and how I, want my body to be so I can be comfortable in my own skin. It's still a constant balancing act and still a challenge, but regardless, it's so much better than it was before. Looking back, I think the funny thing is I don't know how I did it for so long. Like, I don't know how. I'm not someone who's a real private person. I'm not good at like hiding things. So the fact that even someone like me was able to hide this for like 3 decades it's insane to me. Like, I can't believe I was able to do that. But that just shows you how terrified I was and how certain I was that not only was transition not an option, but that my life would be ruined if people just found out who I was. Like I said, I was in denial about actually being trans. I fought that so hard for so long. Like, I would literally like write down lists, like trying to convince myself why I wasn't trans. And I'm gonna have to read some things online early on from some other trans girls that had kind of also convinced me that I wasn't trans. Because there's like, people sharing their own experiences. But one girl was kind of nasty and had said like, and I think she was somebody who was very, very naturally feminine. So she was like, well, if you don't feel like this or you don't feel like that, then you're probably not trans, and this and that. And it made me question, what, if that's true, then yeah, I'm not trans. But it turned out it was totally inaccurate. But it was just one more thing that like kept me in denial for a long time. Yeah, it's crazy to think that I was able to do that for so long and stay like in denial and keep everything so hidden. But ultimately, like I said, I got to a point, and I think this is where most trans people get to. You just realize like it becomes, the longer you hide it, the longer you try to fight it, the more the stronger it becomes, the more difficult it becomes to do. And it just tears you apart. And I think that's where you get some of these people that do the protesting and spend a lot of time like spreading hate against trans people and stuff like that. It's because there's so much anger and anguish. And I'm not saying that's every person that disagrees with it, but I think it's a large majority of them, and that's definitely been my experience. The ones that are really, it's one thing to say, like I said before, it's one thing to say I don't understand that or I don't agree with it, and it's another thing to get extremely angry and have all this hate and anger and want to, commit violence towards someone. that, you know, often points to there's much deeper feelings there, and there's a reason why they feel that way. So yeah, if you continue to try to bury those things down forever, it's going to become very difficult and often very destructive. Yeah, so it's most people reach a point where just like, I can't do this anymore and I have to be myself. You know, the good thing is that in the vast majority of those cases, once they embrace that, their life is only going to get better. And that's not to say there are going to be challenges. You might not, you might, lose friends and family along the way, and maybe even, jobs and things like that. But yeah, I mean, every trans girl I spoke to ahead of time was like, hey, in spite of all the hard stuff, this was more than worth it. And I can definitely echo those sentiments. And I feel like in spite of losing my job, losing my sponsors, and cutting my powerlifting career shorter than what it would have been, all the money it cost me, the family members that no longer speak to me and things like that, don't even have to think about it for a second. It's, 100% worth it. And like I said, my only regret's not doing it sooner, but that's how life goes. And glad I did it when I did do it. So.
And on the documentary, I must align with you as well, because you said what I say when I speak on the podcast about if I can give one person a voice, or one person can be helped by something I talk about, you know what it's like. You can listen to, maybe someone listens to this whole episode and they take even 10 seconds, and that could change someone's life. And you said it on the documentary, and I was like, this is my person, because you said, if I can help one person from not committing suicide or not feeling alone, honestly, I know we align here. It's such a gift, and I'm sure that my loyal listeners would love to follow your story, or maybe even, people might want to reach out. And is Instagram the best place? Because if it goes into your request, of course, you do, battle with this sort of these people message.
Yeah, Instagram is still probably the best place, but yeah, it's hard because you do get so many messages and everything gets buried. It's hard to keep up with everything. And but yeah, if people want to reach out, Instagram's great. And I'm working on some more things. Like, people haven't seen the documentary and it sounds like something they're interested in, I would definitely recommend. It's available on almost every streaming service now, and I know it's on YouTube for free. I'm also working on an autobiography too, so I'm like about halfway done with my book and trying to make as much time as I can. And because there's a lot more. I mean, the documentary follows me for like a 2-year period after I was outed, but there's so much more throughout my whole life. And I mean, we've touched on a lot of those things, but just, stuff growing up and all the stuff I went through as a teenager, the Marine Corps, and then when I worked in presidential security when I was in the Marines, then all through powerlifting, and then, transitioning, and, all those things. There's a lot of crazy stuff that's happened during my life. And sometimes it's funny because like people will get to know me and they'll just be like, man, your life is just doesn't sound real. It sounds like some, Hollywood made up thing, but to me, it's just my life. Right. So I feel like just like any other person, these are just my experiences. This is how I, the things I've been through. But it is a, relatively, I think in one way it's a very unique tale, but in another way, I think it's a very common theme. And really all my life's been about is the journey to find yourself and be your authentic self. And I think almost everyone can relate to that. And so that's where I think, like, in one hand, that it's an interesting journey, but on the other hand, it's a journey we can all relate to from different perspectives.
100%. Maybe we could do another podcast in the future talking about the things you just mentioned there as well, if you were up for it, because I feel like we could probably talk for quite some time. I mean, I'm empowered by you, and again, I do mean that. I'm not just saying it. It is phenomenal, your story, but like you just said there, a really good summary for what we've spoken about. Everyone, I believe, unless you're a superhero, can relate to this in some way, because we all face conflict, external pressure, or confusion, of where to head in life, because life is fucking rough sometimes, and sometimes you can't just say it is what it is, and it gets really, really tough. So thank you so much for sharing your story, because I know that it will give people strength to face challenges. And I'm just so thankful that, of course, I managed to get into your messages and they came through not as, oh yeah, I won't get started on these people that message you because it's very upsetting to hear, but we rise up together, right?
100%. Yeah. It's one thing, I guess, if one other thing I think it's important to share is that I've been asked many times, how do you deal with the hate, and how do you deal with, like, people saying stuff like, all trans people should be rounded up and eliminated and, exterminated and stuff like that. And just people saying nasty personal attacks and things like, I should have my children taken away from me and all kinds of stuff. Um, what I try to remember, and something I learned a long time ago, is that when people say nasty or really mean things to someone, it's not a reflection of that person, it's a reflection of the person saying those things. And that, as long as you keep that in mind, and I realize, like, look, it's not, it's that doesn't say anything about me. It says much more about the person that's saying the mean things. And as long as I keep that perspective and don't internalize that, it makes all the difference in the world. And I was trying to share that with people because I think that's so important, because it's easy to kind of take those things to heart and let it start sinking in, especially when you hear it over and over again. And you start feeling like there is something wrong with you, but it's not. It's that is those person's issue, their own issues and their own anger and their own resentment that's coming out and being pushed onto another person. So just remember, like, when someone says something terrible, it says a lot more about who they are than it does about who you are.
Yeah, and acting authentically, which is the title of this podcast, becoming authentic. If you're authentic and true to yourself and your values as a person, I believe the right person, the universe delivers them to you, and you do find your way. And I always say as well, opinions are not facts. We can either take them in or we can let them go. And, you are a true hero of being able to withstand a lot and inspire people along the way. So thank you so much for coming on today. Honestly, I absolutely loved hearing more about you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really sincerely consider this, a great honor. And every time I'm thankful for every time I get to share my story. And like we, touched on earlier, just the idea that it may help someone out there. I think that's super powerful. And I feel very fortunate to even be in a position to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Janae. I'm going to speak to you soon.
Sounds good.
See you later.
Hey!